Race and Education by Adriana Vidana, Jack Nolan, Khadija Crosby, Kiana Quiros, Liliana Serrato.
Hey, good evening, you guys. My name is Khadija Crosby, and tonight we will be talking about race and education. So, as we all know, the United States has been a nation divided by race and ethnicity for centuries. African Americans have been denied their right to education throughout the United States from early as 1820s when the anti-literacy laws started to be passed. These laws prevented African American slaves from being taught to read and to write. As a result of this, many forms of discrimination and racial inequality have been present throughout our society and still remain visible today. Have you guys ever heard of the Brown versus Board of Education case? Well, in 1954, this case declared segregation in schools to be inherently unequal and affirmative action laws starting in the 1960s. These laws attempted to equalize the playing field in education between African Americans and white people. So we ask ourselves, why is this so important? In terms of power, there is a dominant group and a minority group. These groups are determined by the color of your skin. Imagine this. The darker your skin is, the more disadvantaged your ethnic group is. At its most basic level, education is important because it gives people the baseline skills to survive as an adult in the world. These skills include basic literacy and numeracy, as well as the ability to communicate, complete tasks, and work with others. Education is essential for nearly every type of job or career, and in many cases, education makes a difference between being able to perform a job safely and accurately and being unable to perform that job at all. Poverty is a huge influence when it comes to academic achievement. In many low-income homes, education is not a priority because these children are expected to work in order to sustain the household. So in order to improve the overall inequality in education within minority communities, the government must start to implement the same opportunities to everyone, regardless of race and or socio-economical status.
In the article Is It Easy Living in the Big Easy? Examining the lives of emerging African American adults in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, the author studied experiences young adults in the New Orleans area had with their community and education. In poorer areas like the neighborhoods in New Orleans, issues with funding public schools are very common. Some of these issues include a lack of after-school care, a lack of extracurricular activities in general, disparities among students' education level, disparity among students' engagement levels, new or inexperienced teachers, increased security guards or police, and poor building conditions. All these factors add on to the already difficult experience of high school for many and are further exacerbated by an overall lack of funding in every aspect of these students' lives. Without proper funding for the schools, we see decreases in the amount of kids who graduate high school and decreases in the amount who go to college. Specifically, students described how difficult it was for newer teachers to come in and be effective. One of the students saying that, well, many of the teachers at Carver High School were from Teach for America. They were young, and most of them had just gone out of college, and I know for a fact that 2 or 3 were intimidated. You would hear it in their voices. They would do what the students told them to do. I didn't like it. I didn't like the fact that the students were the way they were. They were so disruptive. This led to kind of a rotating door of teachers, as many decided it was too daunting of an environment to even teach in. Another issue described was the disparity needed in the difficulty of the curriculum, explaining that in public schools sometimes when you are housed with individuals who don't take education seriously, you kind of get lost in it. It is okay that everyone else is mediocre. So it's like I was always trying to go to the next lesson, or I was always trying to get ahead, but the teacher was just focused on the fact that everybody wasn't getting it. Charter and private schools are also an issue, and they exacerbate it further by taking away students who are more likely to be engaged in class, as well as have the resources at home needed to keep up in education.
The impact on African Americans. As we all are aware, the reason students are pushed to get good education is so that they can have the opportunity to get a well-paying job and to receive the same respect as white Americans do. Unfortunately, it seems as if though even black females and males are receiving a good education, it does not mean they are guaranteed a job. In the article Race and the Invisible Hand, he states, "One of the most disturbing trends I detected in my analysis of overall patterns was the inability of black men to either successfully pursue the trades they had studied in high school or to recover successfully after switching trade preferences, as their white peers seem to do easily." Royster. This is to say that even though African Americans are getting a good education following their pursuits, they are struggling to find a well-paying job that is in their line of goals because white Americans are receiving these opportunities much quicker than African Americans. This makes jobs scarce for African Americans and leaves them with low-paying jobs that they do not want. They also got more effective assistance from family and friends and from white male teachers. Blacks, by contrast, often relied on poorly situated black family members and friends and received only verbal encouragement rather than material assistance from white male teachers. Royster. Material assistance is very much dependent on in our society. It ultimately depends on who you know. This is not to say that African Americans have no chance at a good job, but there needs to be a change to see this. As there are more companies that are proving the importance on diversity and several black CEOs that are making a change, there needs to be this continuous focus on enforcing diversity and promoting more healthy conversations about race. In How Capitalism Underdeveloped Black America, a Critical Reassessment, Marable uses Walter Rodney's thesis from how Europe underdeveloped Africa to support that capitalism was a factor in the underdevelopment of Black America. Rodney's argument, in part, was that white people tried to justify the oppression of African people by saying that it was for the economy, and as a result, we got capitalism that required white racism. It also explained what it was like in the 1980s during Ronald Reagan's presidential term. The way that communities were already suffering suffered more because federal social programs like job training, community development agencies, and cooperates and public health were either fully eliminated or severely curtailed. He opposed enforcement of equal employment opportunity regulations and depicted racist stereotypes in his speeches. Reagan's actions during his presidency contributed to the way black people were treated in the United States, and as a result, it also interfered with their employment. Also, while president, Reagan had the Department of Agriculture reduce the food that was served to children in schools. Marable continues to use Rodney's thesis when discussing education and how black colleges created a sort of safe space that was both social and intellectual. Rodney's thesis on education was that African educational system was meant to give young people confidence and pride as members of society. In African American women workers in the post-industrial period, the role of education in evaluating racial wage parity among women, Katrina Davis compares wages between white, Latina, and black women. A factor that led to the increase in wages was education, more precisely the level of education that was achieved. It is also stated that the variation in wages was related to cognitive skills and attitudinal traits, as measured by scores that identified educational expectations and inspirations, self-esteem, and level of assertiveness. Confident women of color were typically not liked by their employers because of the stereotypes that had been created. From 1960 to 2000, black women earned less than white women, but the number of educated black women continued to grow. Davis goes on to show data that proves that black female workers did not get the jobs that they were qualified for. In 1940, only 7% of black women held a clerical position with a high school diploma, while it was nearly 60% for white women. The data that was provided are tables that represent the levels of education with the year, earnings, and race. The results were that even when education was not included, there was still wage inequality present. Educational gender gaps, expectations, and difficult occupation attainment. We know that the education system is failing many African American people, to say the least. We have watched them be treated unfairly, and unfortunately this happens with general education as well. We saw this dating back to school segregation, where white people were obviously given much better education options than black people were. Today we see that in many areas where black people reside, they have poor educational standards and lower graduation rates overall. In this case, I would like to focus on the fact that not only is good education very hard to obtain for African Americans, but also the fact that it is much harder for black men to obtain than black women. And parental expectations, family structure, and the black gender gap in educational and occupational attainment, an intersectional approach to social psychological model of status attainment by Davis Keyes explained the black women have been more successful in school than men when it comes to education. However, these women are also held to higher standards when it comes to fulfilling educational standards, while younger black men are not held to such high standards in hopes that it would keep them off the streets and away from criminal activity. Parent expectations are that young women get a good education, try to beat teen pregnancy, and become an independent woman, much like themselves, who raised them. As for men, they are not asked to achieve in school from a young age, but instead to stay off the streets and away from criminal activity. Young black men are challenged in school and sometimes have nothing else to look forward to. If their sister is receiving all the support, this could really hurt them. This could always lead to them going in the wrong direction and possibly getting criminally involved. Not to say that only black men find trouble more easily, but when women are held to higher standards, it's hard for them to fall out of them. These struggles root from their homes, their parent expectations, and when they fail them, it becomes another challenge for black people all over again. They already dealt with poorly taught education, discrimination, and now we have to see how they are failed sometimes by their own support systems, if they have any. Another important note would be that even though young black women are more likely to succeed than black men in schooling, that is not always the case when it comes to attaining occupation, simply because there is still that question of not only hiring a woman, but a woman of color at that, something the authors Davis Keyes referred to as a double jeopardy. We must look beyond the smaller matters and instead look further into the struggles of African American people and see what we can do to resolve these issues that have gone on for far too long.
In class, we talked about many circumstances in black communities that affect their educational outcomes and ways we can combat some of these circumstances. We spoke about a lack of funding for poorer neighborhoods, which leaves schools with high student-to-teacher ratios, a lack of materials, poorly funded or non-existent after-school care and extracurriculars, and a lack of emphasis on academics in general. These issues further compound when even black people who do have a good education and qualifications still struggle to reach the same attainment as white people due to limiting systemic factors. In class, we often discussed how this topic of education is especially important for increasing social mobility, but since most black neighborhoods don't have access to high quality and well-funded education, not much has changed in that aspect since the Jim Crow era.